start where I think we left off with iconoclasm. Because iconoclasm has been a challenge for what became known as the Reformed churches. Wherever, whether we're talking about the Swiss, by the way, Geneva, which we think of as Switzerland, was not part of the Confederation of the cantons until mid-16th century. Before that, they were under the leadership of Savoy. They were part of the territory of Savoy, and they, shortly before Calvin got to Geneva, the Genevans kicked the Savoyards out, and that included the bishop and the magistrates. And so gradually Geneva became what we think of as kind of the heart of Switzerland, although Zurich would still want to claim that title. Iconoclasm. What is iconoclasm? How would you know it if you saw it? What is iconoclasm? Okay, smashing. There is that delightful kind of feel of being a vandal, destroying, and that's what really got the reformers concerned. There was some iconoclasm in northern Germany, in Saxony, in Wittenberg. It mainly took place when, you remember, I've mentioned a couple times that after Luther's dramatic speech, "Here I stand, I can do no other, God help me, amen," and then he went back to Wittenberg, but he didn't make it to Wittenberg because he was kidnapped, or there was a mock kidnapping. He was swept away to the castle of Wartburg and spent 10 months there, out of circulation. But while he was there in the castle, there was a lot of stuff going on in Wittenberg and so on. One of his professorial colleagues kind of filled the leadership void and was really much more aggressive than Luther himself on the destruction of images. And so Luther eventually came back and said, "No, we're not going to be smashing things or destroying things, we'll take this." He almost sounds Presbyterian, right? We'll do this decently and in order. One place that all the reformers agreed on was that the Mass was an idol, and that had to be swept out of the church. What's the Mass? Anybody? You hear that today. The Mass is the liturgy of the Lord's Supper. Now, why would that be an idol? Because of transubstantiation. Because the priest becomes the sole facilitator in the interaction between the people and God or Jesus. And the reformers, in their own various ways, affirmed what we call today the priesthood of all believers, in opposition to the Mass. What's the priesthood of all believers?
They have direct access to God.
Okay. You don't have to go through some intermediary. And here's a little bite to that. You can't. You don't have to, but you can't, because those people are not intercessors. There's only one person that holds our salvation, and that's the Lord God Almighty. Going through other means and mediums becomes problematic. So iconoclasm is a big deal, and it's really a big deal in the Swiss Confederation. The Swiss were particularly interested in a kind of purity, so that doing away with the furniture. Well, if you were in a Catholic church, what would you see here? The altar. The altar, and which is not here. You notice it? Mark and I were reminiscing about our seminary days, and one of our professors. I remember when Dr. Dowie had an irate, some donor had given a lot of money for a big table, and it was so big that it divided the chancel from the people. And Dr. Dowie just said, a table should look like a table. It's not, and what he meant by that was that you should be able to see through it.
The part was, and not like a bull-slaying altar.
That's right. Not like a bull-slaying altar. Right. You want an altar in your church right there? Bring a few chickens. We don't use the table for a sacrifice. Why not?
Sacrifice has been given.
Again, there's one sacrifice. It's sufficient for all. We don't need to replicate that Mass after Mass, service after service. One of the things that Zwingli masterminded, and he died far too young as a result of warfare, but he established an educational system that he called the Prophetsai, the prophets. And this educational system was designed to have all the clergy in the area, and sometimes there could be 8 or 10 or 12, sometimes more, selected lay people and so on, and they met every day and worked through the lectionary in Greek and Hebrew. And it was quite extensive and intensive. Zwingli also was the guy who said, we'll put Cassie on the spot here. How do you decide what to preach on? Your Sunday's coming up to preach. How do you decide
I'm supposed to read the lectionary and choose one of those passages. Often I read it, don't like them, and choose a different one and make our music director crazy. I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for.
No, that's a very practical.
Yeah.
But
I said her and every preacher.
yeah. How can we? Yeah. Again, the Calvin himself said the human heart is an idol-making machine, an idol factory. And so we can turn anything into an idol, including the lectionary. There are some improvements, I think, could be made on the lectionary. But what Zwingli did, the first day he stepped into the pulpit of the minster in Zurich, he opened the Bible to Matthew chapter 1, and he just went from there. Every Sunday, preaching another text from Matthew. That's called Lectio Continua. And that became a favored way of choosing the texts. So they're not necessarily your choice. And people need to know that you don't like the text, or don't appreciate the text, or struggle with the text, and to invite them in. To say, this is what we've been given for this day. What will we say about it? Okay. When Zwingli died, within a couple months, his successor was appointed. Heinrich Bullinger became essentially the senior pastor of all the churches, the head of all the churches in Zurich. Not just the city of Zurich, but the countryside as well, the canton. And he continued preaching Sunday by Sunday. It came to Grossminster, the large church. He preached that week after week, and we had this information last week. He preached over the course of his career something like 7,500 sermons. And of course, the Reformers not only preached these sermons, they believed that to properly engage the text, you need to know Greek and Hebrew. And if you don't know Greek and Hebrew, then you're falling down on the job. Well, if you want to strike fear in the hearts of some Presbyterians, go to a Presbyterian meeting with your Hebrew text or your Greek text and say, I'm having trouble with this particular text. Could you help me with this? And you'll see people fleeing. When you hear the word Calvin or Calvinist, what do you think of? Nothing. Which is probably right. That's probably a fair.
I think of rigidity.
Rigidity.
Yeah. and sad, like dour-faced.
Yeah. They were all dour in those days, but that's, they had to wear these scratchy clothes. And, Calvin was not the kind of guy you go to the corner pub with. And he would probably admit that. We'll come back to that. But one thing more than the others is predestination. Ever heard of predestination? It's unfair to hang this on Calvin. Yeah, Luther, Zwingli, Bucer, Calvin, all of them preached some form of predestination. You know why they did that?
Because they're the Bible.
It's so simple. It's so simple. It's in the Bible, the Bible. And I'm not mocking that. That is so important. Calvin had some quite harsh words to say about predestination, and he actually, buried it toward the end of his Institutes. He certainly didn't think it was the center of the gospel he was preaching. We'll get to that center in a few minutes. But all the reformers, including Luther, had to deal with the fact Luther dealt with it this way. He said that he responded to Erasmus. Erasmus wrote a famous tract called the Freedom of the Will, which just sent Luther crazed into his study to answer it the next day. He wrote a big tract called The Bondage of the Will. And Luther insisted that is the state of fallen humanity, that we are bound by sin, and yet we can count on the grace of God. That's part of the dynamic that they did the same. The South German and Swiss reformers followed similar paths. I just want to read you this, because whatever else you think about in terms of in terms of predestination, and it's usually not good things. We exist as a society as a more Erasmian. We believe in freedom, mostly, especially our freedom. Other freedom, not so much, but Heinrich Bullinger, who took over from Zwingli when Zwingli was killed, took over from him. One of the things he did of enduring status is that he wrote the Second Helvetic Confession. It was originally intended just as a kind of personal testament to be offered as he was getting older, long in tooth. He wanted something to pass on to the Zurich faithful. And he wrote this very long. It's the longest document in the Book of Confessions. Nobody ever reads it. It's not true, I read it. A long time ago. I haven't read it for a while. But there's there's one line that, if nothing else, speaks for all the reformers, or most of them. And that is, how do you know who's redeemed? How do you know who's done enough good stuff, or not too much bad stuff, or... Well, part of the answer is election or predestination has nothing to do with what you do or don't do. You don't have any effect on whether you are redeemed or not. You can hope that you are, and you can act like you are, but it's not up to you. And you can't accumulate a ledger sheet of good and bad. And
It's not if you are redeemed, it's who your Redeemer is.
it's good. Good. Absolutely. Who your Redeemer is becomes a primary question. When confronted with this as a pastor and preacher, what Bullinger said was, we are to have a good hope for all. Rather than trying to keep score and figure out who's in and who's out and all of that, which can be so detrimental. Bullinger said, we are to have a good hope for all. And although God knows who are His, and here and there mention is made of the small number of the elect, yet we must hope well of all, not rashly judge any person to be reprobate. That just seems to me such a practical response to it's good stuff. I don't have the foggiest idea who's redeemed or not. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and wonder. The scholars of the Calvinist movement that came across the Atlantic, you know what we call them? Puritans. The Puritans had this aching, burning desire to know that they were on the Lord's side. But we are to have a good hope for all. Let's say a few words about Martin Bucer. Bucer was the reformer in Strasbourg. Have you ever been to Strasbourg? It's really a wonderful city, and it's amazing how wonderful it is because it's Alsatian. And what that means is, depending on what day you went there, it was French or it was German. Yeah, right now it's French. So if you go to Strasbourg, it's just off the Rhine. It's interesting. So it's been a cosmopolitan city for a long, long time. And you can see just by the population, I put this in there just to compare. So around 1500, the city was 20,000. It's marketed as a pretty good-sized town, especially when you look at Wittenberg at the same time, or Geneva. So, Wittenberg, 2,000 people. So Bucer was the reformer, the chief reformer, and he had a coalition of, he recruited people to his work. And he was well regarded as a scholar. He was also a moderate, a mediating figure. He was constantly reaching out to the Germans to the north and the Swiss to the south, constantly trying to bring them together. He was incredible. He was crushed by the Marburg failure, which Luther simply refused to go any further than the 14 points they agreed on, as long as we didn't use his words for the Lord's Supper. And you know what happens when you're a mediating figure, when you're a moderate trying to work out. You get shot at from both sides, and that's what happened to him. He was, and I think to this day, he was completely neglected. But he shouldn't be completely neglected, not least because he was the person who made Calvin a pastor. He is the person through whom, as his mentor, Calvin learned what it was to be a pastor. Calvin was bright, make no bones about that. He was a scholar and wanted to be a scholar. But Bucer taught him how to be a pastor, to care about people, to put things in order, to understand what people needed and how they could receive grace in the midst of the turmoil of the 16th century. For that reason alone, I think Bucer is somebody that bears much more attention. The way it unfolded is kind of interesting. Calvin is kind of the opposite of Luther in terms of his upbringing. You remember that Luther's father wanted him to be a lawyer. And he indeed went to law school. And at a certain point, he was nearly struck by lightning, and he had an incredible near-death experience. And he decided, he made a pledge to, of course, to intercessory person, namely St. Anne. Who's St. Anne again? Mother of Mary, grandmother of the Blessed Savior. Right? Luther cried out to St. Anne to save him, and he did what even Calvinists do from time to time, which is make a deal. Right? So we'll make a deal here. Save me, and I'll become a monk. Which he did, much to his father's chagrin. But that's what set Luther on the path to Reformation. Calvin was the opposite of that. Calvin was a good and devoted son. His father wanted him to be a priest. And you know why he wanted him to be a priest? Because there's money in it. there's money in being a priest because you have these benefits that come to you. And there's a certain stability. Well, Calvin did not desire to be a priest, but he followed his father's advice until his father died. And then he had these lawyerly instincts, and so law was his chosen field. However, all that background didn't go to waste. As a young man, so Calvin was, let's see if I can do the math in my head. He was, here, 16 years younger than Luther. Let's see, 14, is that right?
I think it's more like 20.
It could be. Luther's 1483, and Calvin was 1509. 25 years. So what this means in simple terms is Calvin's a second generation reformer. We have to take that into account. There's been a lot going on before Calvin ever came on the scene. And he had the advantage of a lot of aftersight, right? So Calvin wrote a book then as a young man. He was 27 years old, and he got this book found. It was called. It actually wasn't called the Institutes yet. It was a relatively slim volume, 6 chapters on Christian faith, theology. And it became the closest thing you could have at that point to a bestseller. It made Calvin a very desirable figure in the Swiss, South German arena. So let me still have some time here. So Calvin wrote this book. He was on his way back home, which was in Picardy, Noyon, France, northern France. But there were all these interminable conflicts, particularly between the French and the Holy Roman Empire. They were constant, and there was no clear way to get back home, and so Calvin took a detour, and he ended up in Geneva, just for a short time, do anything to, let the situation calm down, but he was cornered there in Switzerland, in Geneva, and ended up ultimately leaving just once and then coming back. He left. He left in he left in 1538 and he came back in 1541. And where he went, those 3 years, those were the years he spent with Bucer. So, the reason he left Geneva was because there was a battle between the reformers, of which he was a junior member, Calvin was, but there was quite a battle going on about who had the authority to excommunicate. Who had the authority, and what the city council said is, we have the authority. In fact, we refer to all these different reformers as the magisterial reform. That sounds so high and lifted up, but that's not what it is. The magisterial reform was those reformers who were ruled by the magistrates. And that included Luther, that included Calvin, Zwingli, all the names we know. What was the alternative to the magisterial reform? The radical reform. The radical reform. Those were reformers who were not tied into the political structures that they found, that in fact moved away from that. And one of the big things that separated them from the magisterial reform was baptism. Baptism.
Who were some of those?
Yeah.
Any names we would know?
Menno Simons. Does that name mean anything to you? How about Menno Simons, the founder of the Mennonites? Okay. And you have to know that all these radical reformers were persecuted, not only by the Roman Catholics, but also by the magisterial reforms. In fact, it was required in Zurich that every baby be baptized. And there were many of the radical reform of the Swiss branch that said, where is it in the Bible? Tell me about the Bible. Is there anything you can point me to that will say, yes, we should do this because it's in the Bible? The answer is it's a tough case to make. So the radical reformers were persecuted, and one of the things they did that is just so shocking to me. They arrested people who were not baptizing their infant children, and they tied them up and tied them to a stone and threw them off the bridge into whatever river was nearby. Yeah. Does that sound like the gospel to you?
Pretty heavy baptism.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. So, but that really happened. Yeah. Pardon me?
There's some folks here for that.
I agree with that. Go ahead.
Fritz, is this where the Baptists come from? That tradition, or?
Yes, like English Baptists would have a pedigree that goes right back to the German and Swiss radical reform. Yeah. When Luther came to Geneva, he was already incredibly well educated as a humanist. Remember what we said about humanism? Remember the slogan? Ad fontes, back to the sources. Right? So, Calvin loved the sources. Using this, I'm losing my. Okay, are we there? Yeah. So going back to the sources, Calvin loved the church fathers, Greek and Latin. He loved even the pagan greats. You know, there's Plato and Aristotle and all. Mostly he didn't like Aristotle, but that's another story. When we have to remember that when we say, sola scriptura, only the Bible, at the same time, these people like Calvin, like Heinrich Bullinger, like Martin Bucer, were all incredible scholars. And they learned from the classics, not just from the Bible. Question? Calvin's motto, I printed it out here. This is to get at the sense that Calvin was just a big brain walking around. He was much more than that. My heart I offer you, Lord, promptly and sincerely. This is Calvin's motto. Cor meum tibi offero. My heart. And the Calvin's, what do you call the symbol of, Luther's was a rose. Calvin was a flame, flaming heart. So flaming heart in the hand. My heart I offer. Excuse me. One of the things that was really important to Calvin was to understand not whether you were saved or not, but what you do in the world. And what you do in the world is live in doxology and glorifying God. Whatever you do, it should be to glorify God. Christian life is a life of doxology. And he said that we are Christians, not because we've got everything straight, but because we place ourselves before God. And so we are always, every bit of our lives, our waking lives, our sleeping lives, our good deeds, our bad deeds, everything we do is before God. In the presence of God, you can't escape it. Luther said, Calvin said that we are not our own. This is an important slogan I gave you a little piece of this just so you could have a feel for the institutes. We are not our own masters, Calvin says, but we belong to God. If, I'm skipping down, if we then are not our own, but the Lord's, it is clear what error we must flee and whither we must direct all the acts of our life. If we're not our own, Calvin says, we know what we have to put aside and what we have to orient our lives to. We are not our own. It's not up for discussion. We are not our own. Let not our reason nor our will therefore sway our plans and deeds. We are not our own. Let us therefore not set it as a goal to seek what is expedient to us according to the flesh. We are not our own. Insofar as we can, let us therefore forget ourselves and all that is ours. Calvin doesn't reference this. You remember when Peter was walking with Jesus and they end up having a discussion that gets increasingly tense, and Peter says at some point, you can't be you can't be going to Jerusalem to suffer and die. Didn't you just hear what I said? You're the Lord. And what did Jesus say? Get behind me, Satan. Yeah. And I have my trusty Bible open here. Let's see. Always good to go back to the sources. So Mark chapter 8. Jesus went on with them, went on with the disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" Is this familiar to you? And they asked him, and they answered him, John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets. He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Uh-oh. "Who do you say that I am? You are the Christ, the Messiah." Then he began to, this is Jesus, then Jesus began to teach them that he was the Son of Man, must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. That is, Jesus had been talking in parables, but now he says this quite openly. And Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at the disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." This becomes a crucial text for Calvin. You're setting your thing on not on divine things, but on human things. He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any of you want to become my followers," what? If any of you want to be my follower, you want to be a follower of Jesus? Deny yourself, take up a cross, and follow. For Calvin, this is the center of theology of Christian life. To deny oneself. So you can read this little snippet. The institutes, they're actually really quite readable. But I don't see you rushing out to get your copies here. But by the time he's done, that is Calvin's done, it's gone from a little book like this to 2 volumes, worked through 5 different editions over his time, mainly in Geneva. And he kept playing with the organization, trying to get it just right and adding to it. But he really intended it to be kind of a handbook, to be a guide for the Christian life, and especially for clergy. I'm just having a tough time here. That's not it. Okay. Yeah, okay. Sorry. One of the things, and you might find this helpful, Calvin did not come up with this. It's called the munus triplex, the threefold office. And Calvin found this a useful way to talk about Jesus. Who is Jesus? Well, he is prophet, priest, and king. And you can use those 3 headings to figure out who Jesus is. Prophet, priest, and king. He also got from Martin Bucer this idea of, in the church there are 4 offices. How many offices do we have? Presbyterians, we've heard PCUs.
3.
Pardon? There's elders, and we kind of subdivide that, right? We have teaching elders and ruling elders. We have elders, deacons.
Pastor.
Those become teaching elders, pastors, right? What we don't have, what's left of the 4 offices is 3: pastor, elder, deacon. That's what we currently. And when a minister is introduced at the Cherokee Presbytery, it's a minister of word and sacrament. So the one we left out, which I think we should have, was doctor, by which he means not physician, but professor. The church, Calvin argued, should have pastors, doctors, professors, teachers, priests, elders, and deacons. We're about out of time. I want to get to one thing here. Sola Scriptura. Scripture one is such an important term. Not just for Calvin, for the Reformation. What we need to do, and this is my language, not Calvin's, but studying the Bible, reading the Bible, living with the Bible is more about marinating than it is about mining. What we've done over the years, what I've seen over my 45 years in the church, and plenty before that, has been a kind of mining. We teach people to go into the Bible, find your favorite text, put it in your pocket, and at the right time take it out and throw it at somebody. And we fight with texts, flipping them to each other. Marinating is an entirely different project. In marinating, you lower yourself into the flavors of Scripture. You lay yourself on and you let the words of Scripture infiltrate you and give you a different taste altogether. We teach people to mine. But what we really ought to be doing for ourselves and each other is marinate. One last thing. Reform is not populist, but theocentric. It's not what people do, it's what happens to them. Who's the ultimate reformer?
Jesus?
Jesus will do. Jesus, God. So when we use this slogan, Ecclesia Reformata Semper Reformanda, the church reformed and always being reformed, who's reforming it? God is reforming. We're so interested in being the ones who do it. Calvin said the church is reformed and always being reformed. That's our hope. That God will be involved and will direct us wherever we need to be going. Well, we have many more days to take up, but that's the last one for now. I thank you so much for coming.